بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all of the listeners. Inshallah you are keeping well. Those of you who are here on Instagram Live, those of you who are listening later on Instagram, those of you who are watching on Spotify and Apple playlist, wherever you are so welcome to join us today. And we have Sayed Bilal, who'll be joining imminently, inshallah, to be our special guest today. Sayyidina, are you there? We are yearning to see your face, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you doing? How's everything?
My whole room just fills with noor instantly.
No, I was about to say that noor is actually on your side. I like the natural lighting and then the lighting on top of that.
No, it's you. If the screen wasn't here, this room would be dark, Sayyidina.
Ya Allah, Ya Allah. Doing well.
How are you keeping? How are you? Tell me first, because I've missed you too much. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, everything's well. I'm currently in Houston. So, I think we're still in a pre fast breaking mode. Whereas you're enjoying yourself right now.
So here's the thing, and the listeners who've been tuning in every day will know this. I usually have like a drink or some sort of chai or mojito, but today I thought, no. Today I have some reha on my dear brother who's still fasting. I don't need to have anything.
There's no takalluf, as we say in Urdu, as in Arabic we say ta'arruf. None of that.
Yeah.
So feel free to step
بين
away.
الإخوان.
لا تعرف بين الإخوان. So
keeping well though.
What's new on your end?
Alhamdulillah, it's good. London is blessed. We are Shahr Ramadan is busy. The city is busy. Things are happening.
Okay, excellent.
The first half of the month is usually where you can take a bit of time, but then come the nights of Qadr and Shahadat, we're zooming to Eid. So I'm really trying to soak in the time that we have. Even though it's busy, still trying to soak it in. What about you? How's your family? How's the community?
Family as well. Unfortunately, I haven't seen them much in the past, month and a half. I was in Iraq, Iran, ziyarat, had some other lecture commitments, and now, on the road for Shahr Ramadan. But, Houston's a fine community. It's so I'm in Dallas. It's about a 4-hour drive from where I am. But, very nice community at Al Ghadir, and, many of the English speakers will testify that have gone there, that it's just a wonderful community.
Yeah, I've heard good things from those who've been. They're like, when you go, you'll enjoy yourself in Houston.
Inshallah, one day.
When are you coming back to London? What's going on? You've been here before, right? You have been here.
I didn't go to London. I've gone to Birmingham, Manchester, and several other places. But this is about pre-pandemic. After that, pandemic happened. Even though there's there's a few communities that reach out every year, but there's just so many places in America and so many responsibilities over here. So when you have a list of regular places that you go to every year, yes, variety is always important, but it's kind of hard to step away at times.
I understand.
Yeah. So that's really what the situation comes down to.
Okay. I asked you this earlier. Let me ask you again. What did you choose to lecture on this time in Shahr Ramadan? Wherever you're going and on the road, what topics have you chosen?
So, I took as the basis of the discussion the famous sermon of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the final day of Sha'ban, introducing the month.
Yeah.
Because, I think that's one of the most profound statements by any ma'soom that we have, explaining what one's responsibilities are in Shahr Ramadan, what is the greatness of this month, and really what does the reality of this month revolve around.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is basically I'm taking some of the concepts mentioned within those within that sermon, and I'm kind of re-examining those things at deeper level. Like, for example, 2 nights ago we looked at Tawbah. So oftentimes people just think Tawbah, okay, it's just forgiveness and repentance, but really, what do these words actually mean in the English language, But if you really dive into the word, Tawbah is related to the Arabic verb taba yatubu, which means to turn. So, that has a theological implication that when a person sins, he turns away from God. But then, okay, on top of that, the Quran says, Taballahu alayhim liyatubu. But God also turns. So what does it mean for God to turn? So, there's many, discussions. So I always like to incorporate an element of, practicality and understanding. But at the same time, I kind of do focus on aqaid and beliefs. So with each of these topics, like, with that Tawbah topic, we had a discussion that why did the imams of Ahlul Bayt do Tawbah if they're ma'soom, and what are the different views and opinions regarding this?
Yeah.
And, so we can have a bit of a comprehensive discussion. So that's kind of like the, general crux of things.
It's appropriate you pick this topic in Shahr Ramadan when everyone's ready to do tawbah for whatever it is we're going through throughout the year. It reminds me, I was reading, this is in one of the books of tafsir. Which one was it? Tafsir al-Qummi. There's a section on Iman and the levels of Iman. And it's linked to Tawbah, where it's like there are some levels of Iman which come and leave you very quickly. And
yes.
when they leave you, the sin, the narration cited is of the Holy Prophet, where someone says to him, what's the difference between the sinner and the sin? How are these things different, right? Because the main crime of the Khawarij was to, quote, make these things unitary. So he says, when a person sins, Iman leaves their heart because it was never part of their heart. It was never كتب الله على قلوبهم. It was never actually written on their heart, as the Quran says. So when it leaves, maybe something enters their heart, some sin or some desire. And when the sin is done, that thing that deceived them leaves their heart, and Iman re-enters, right? So bearing that in mind, people are always kind of fluctuating between having Iman as the governing force in them and having, their desires or other sins governing in them. No one is like 100% sin in of themselves. So bearing that in mind, Tawbah it's hope. It's hope for someone, I think, in Shahr Ramadan, where it's like you can choose to be a better version of yourself if you prioritize the Iman in your heart. When you speak about Tawbah, do you speak it about in a way which gives people hope, or how do you link it to what people are going through every day?
I mean, I think that, we as human beings, whenever we have any action or any concept, the first thing that we look for is to understand its importance or value. And if we don't understand the importance or value of something, then we're not going to have a relationship with it naturally. So, I mean, if we really look at the du'as of the imams of Ahlul Bayt, whether it's as-Sahifat as-Sajjadiyya or any other source, I think one key thing that we can take from these du'as is a methodology on what to prioritize when we're asking from God. So, like, for example, Imam Zainul Abidin, he has a, in one of the supplications of as-Sahifat as-Sajjadiyya, and, right now I'm doing an-Nakal bil-Ma'na, narrating by meaning as opposed to the exact wording. But the Imam, he says that, if there is a loss between my world and the hereafter, allow that loss to be within this world and not the hereafter. So people generally tend to ask for that which is most important to them at that moment. For example, somebody going through heartbreak will ask, that allow me to be with the person that I want to be, and that'll be the most important thing to them. Or somebody who's going through financial problems is going to ask for, allow me to have that nice bonus when it comes in. But if we really step back and look at the grand picture of things, then that which we should really be focused upon when asking is that which is going to have the maximum benefit for us in the long run. And that maximum benefit, revolves around that concept of Tawbah, because Tawbah is something which, impacts the hereafter of an individual. But at the same time, as the traditions, they say that Tawbah has a profound worldly impact upon the quality of our life as well, in our sustenance, in our well-being, in our spiritual temperament, and all of those different realities. So I think that's the first level, that an individual kind of understands the value and the importance of Tawbah and repentance, so they can build a relationship with this concept. And then at the second level, I think a person really needs to engage within the act itself. And there's so many different ways to engage within the act. I mean, the Prophet Muhammad, in a tradition it's quoted 70 times a day, would say istighfar despite being ma'soom. So, I mean, we can take from that at least at the very minimum level, 70 times a day, the line Astaghfirullah Rabbi wa atubu ilayh, or some variant of this line should be coming from us. And if we really ponder on the wordings, I think the element of pondering on the wordings is very profound. Because when you say this line, there's two elements really. There's Astaghfirullah Rabbi wa atubu ilayh. These two sentences. So you're saying Astaghfirullah, Allah, I'm asking for forgiveness. And the form of the word forgiveness you're using is istighfar, which is related with maghfirah. In the Arabic language, the word maghfirah, if you look at its etymological root, it's associated with covering something. That's what the word maghfirah is associated with. So at the first level, you're saying, God, cover me in your mercy and cover my faults. But at the second level, that's not enough either, because then you're saying, Rabbi, oh my Rabb, oh my nourisher, wa atubu ilayh, I turn towards you. So there's the element of covering yourself in God's mercy so we can be drowned in the consciousness of God. And then there's the element of turning towards him as well. So, it really is a very profound discussion.
And interestingly, neither of those things, both of the things can apply for someone who's ma'asum. Covering yourself in the mercy of God, turning back to God, are not exclusive to someone.
Because they're ghayrullah. And if you
Exactly.
understand rahmah as, wujud and existence, but that's
Allah. I was not going to go to wajib, I was not going to go to wahd, I was not going in any of those directions. All I was saying was someone who is ma'asum can still do istighfar without needing to do a sin to achieve those two aims. Covering yourself in the mercy of God, going back towards Allah. That's why the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt are doing, istighfar so much, right? This actually solves a lot of theological problems when you look at it like this, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I try to be very academic in my approach, and I do realize there are different views and there's different people based upon their methodologies and their understanding of isma who have given different answers. But I mean, based upon my mabna, my methodology, what I believe of the ismat of the imams of Ahlul Bayt, from my understanding, istighfar really, that discussion of why the imams did istighfar, is really that istighfar is a expression of ubudiyah and servitude. Exactly. And these individuals were the greatest servants of God. And at the other element, anyone who is other than God should engage in servitude, anyone who is ghayrullah. So, these words etymologically, like maghfirah and covering, covers a sort of ontological need, because the imams are not God, they are not wajibul wujud, they are mumkinul wujud. And that is something that's associated with this concept of them doing istighfar. But that's itself is its own discussion.
Yeah, we've now mentioned at least 3 things in a row, which are not only majaalis, they are ashras, actually.
So as they say, the famous proverb in Arabic, al-kalam yajurru al-kalam.
Exactly.
Words make way to, discussions and words.
And that makes podcasting hard, because it's like, okay, now let's go on that direction, and that direction. But
I kind of, to be honest, I kind of like the free flow style. I mean, it's people listen to so many lectures in Shahr Ramadan. It's nice to, people informally just sit down and just have a discussion and people listen. And I think, there's a lot of benefit that comes with that style.
To all of the listeners, one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done on this channel is with our dear esteemed guest, Sayed Bilal, and with Sheikh Roshendale and with Sayed Hassan.
Yes, do you
remember last Shahr Ramadan?
I remember that was a fun podcast. That was
the 4 of us, we sat together. It was on Zoom last Shahr Ramadan on my YouTube channel, which you guys can follow. And I think for an hour and a half, we just went at it. We were discussing dua, and so many issues came up, which continued.
I think we did everything from dua to cryptocurrency and everything in between.
I was watching earlier to get a clip for a promo. There's one section where Sayed Hassan starts, Sheikh Roshendale is speaking. By the way, he was on this podcast on the 2nd of Ramadan. Okay. And he says something about, improvement and getting better in life. And Sayed Hassan hears this, knowing how he is, and says, you know what, by the way, we don't believe in self-care of these days and well-being of these days. And then you come in and say, yeah, we don't like modernity. And I'm like, guys, please, let's not derail this conversation.
Yeah, I have my own spat with postmodernism.
And then you mentioned postmodernism, and I was like, Bilal. And then I said, don't you get involved as well? Said Hassan, don't encourage him too much. And then it was
because that struck a chord at that moment.
Yeah, you guys were like working off each other. Fortunately, this time all three of you on, but on different days. So I've made sure to not.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
So there's no ganging up on one person.
no, because not that I'm pro modernity. Hey, don't do me like that. I'm just saying, like, I didn't want to, make it a critique of postmodernism too much on the nights of Qadr. We have other things to deal with at the time.
Well, I mean, it's actually a very relevant discussion. I think in the nights, even nights of Qadr and Shahr Ramadan.
Yeah, yeah,
But
no,
because this month in many ways is about reconnection, and I think the whole system of postmodernity really, cuts that connection. But that
no,
itself is its own discussion.
it is, but it's definitely true. It's definitely true that happens, and yeah, yeah. The reason why we're interested in Rahm, so part of mercy, which we're discussing
Hmm.
right now, is about turning back towards Allah and um enveloping someone who is mumkin back to the wajib al-wujud, who gives pure mercy to you, an unconditional mercy. And I think most of Shahr Ramadan are looking for that feeling of being forgiven or being cleansed
Hmm.
or being refreshed. But the thing that interests me most is the other side of things, where it's about each other, right? And it's, well, how easily can I forgive someone who hurt me? And how easily can I ask for forgiveness when I have done something wrong to another person? Because it does seem strange for someone to speak to Allah and say, "Ya Allah, forgive me for that sin," when I'm not really forgiving the one who who has wronged me, and I could easily just forgive them, and my heart would be clear. And I think the longer that we hold on to these feelings of resentment to one another, it actually makes it harder to connect back to Allah when I've not done that to myself. And I see it a lot around me. I don't know if you see this as well. People asking God to forgive them for sins, and they can't forgive their neighbor or their family for the most minor of discrepancies.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like you said, the idea that oftentimes people they ask God for forgiveness, but they aren't willing to forgive others. I mean, as Imam Ali says in his famous letter to Malik al-Ashtar, that, "Oh Malik, forgive the people in the way that you would want Allah to forgive you." And it is a key element of this month is really to, strengthen your relationships with those individuals who are around you. I mean, Islam really does have that two-faceted approach of huququllah, the right of God and the right of the creation as well. And even the Prophet Muhammad in that sermon introducing the month of Shahr Ramadan, he says, وَوَقِّرُوا كِبَارَكُمْ وَارْحَمُوا صِغَارَكُمْ, that honor. The word waqar is related to respect and a type of grandeur. So those who are elder to you, you give them a type of honor, because as another tradition says that due to their experiences they have done much more good in life than you have, because
Mm.
they are older than you on a general basis. Now of course this isn't always the case, but it's a general principle, and it's a mindset really that you should have when you look at those people who are your respected elders. But at the same time, have mercy upon those who are younger than you. So, that's a very important idea right there. And then I think at the second level, when you mentioned that the longer these grudges stay within a person, the harder it becomes. And, this is actually associated. Sorry, my AirPod is coming out right here. It's a
No,
bit
no, you're good.
tricky one.
You gotta
But
put it in like that, you got to get it in firmly.
yeah, I don't use them too often, but it worked out for this one. But
Alhamdulillah.
yeah, I think that's a very important concept. The longer someone stays within their ways, the harder it is to come out. And we see this in different traditions. For example, going back to the discussion on Toba, when a person sins, it's stated that they should ask for forgiveness immediately. Because when you ask for forgiveness immediately, it doesn't seep into you as much, and it doesn't become part and parcel of your habit, and you're building that conscientiousness immediately that I need to snap out of it. And the same really comes when it comes to other individuals. See, one thing that we really kind of lack is that, we're able to see something when somebody else does it, but it's very difficult to look at the mirror, and to look at ourselves. And when we do the same exact things, that, we don't seem to recognize it, and we don't realize that reality. And that's something which we really need to be conscious of when it comes to this discussion.
People have the same feeling about going back to Allah, where I've been doing a sin against God for so long and not asking
Mm.
forgiveness, that it's like, um, it's been so long since I spoke to Allah, like actually
Yeah.
with presence, you know, and
Mhm.
with humility, that I don't even know if He will. These are ideas we have. I don't know if Allah will accept my answer anymore. I don't know if Allah even acknowledges me. Some people think that Allah hates them or resents them, and there are these
Mhm.
ideas that you actually find people are in quite dark places sometimes. And I think this is a very good solution where, you know, the moment you've done something wrong, just ask for forgiveness then and there. Don't let this thing settle or sit with you or remain in you for too long, because it will hurt you in the long run. You know, one must not internalize pain to such a degree. And why not with other people as well, right? I mean, if it's a family member or a friend, what is the rationale for holding a grudge for so long that you then inherit the grudge of the generation before, and next thing you know, you have a problem, you don't even know why you have a problem.
Yeah, that's what happens. You don't even know why you have a problem, and a lot of it comes down to not understanding. I mean, if you really think about it, that why do people yell at each other when they have a
Mm,
discussion? What is the physiological function of raising your voice? The physiological function of raising your voice is for your voice to reach a farther distance. And when it reaches a farther distance, what you are trying to say will reach your audience. Now, when two people are sitting face to face, the reason one party is yelling at another is because they feel that the other party, they're not being able to reach them. And when they feel that blockage, that natural physiology comes up and they start raising that voice at that moment.
mm,
So yeah, I think if you're able to understand human beings as human beings, that we were all created fallibles, we make mistakes, none of us are ma'soom, then I think that realization, if it's truly there, not just in the level of theory, but at the level of the heart, then it makes forgiving another person much more easier. And then the second point, because we're kind of just free flowing through different topics,
let's go for it,
that
Sayed.
I think you mentioned that a lot of people, they ask that question, that I've messed up my entire life and I've sinned time after time again, and I've done all of these different things, how can I turn my face to God? But the beauty of it is that consciousness of God at that moment, the fact that that person is able to have that moment of reflection, means that God already turned towards them.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
I go back to the verse that I kind of mentioned, at some point in this discussion, Taballahu alayhim liyatubu, that Allah turns to them so they can do tawbah, or so they can turn towards Allah. So
Wow.
when we do tawbah, we turn to Allah once, but when this act occurs by us, Allah turns towards us twice. The first turning is for us, that recognition. God gives us that recognition, that consciousness of Him, and the consciousness to do tawbah. And the second time God turns towards us is to forgive us.
Mm,
So, based on the traditions, I think the key element is to have a solid intention not to make that mistake, and to have that azam and that commitment not to go back towards it. And then if a person, does make that mistake, and he does it time and time again, but as long as that 100% intention is not there and he makes that mistake, God will keep forgiving that individual. But of course, the condition is that intention is true, and that commitment to not go back towards it is true as well.
beautifully, like you mentioned, you had to have been called to do tawbah by Allah in order for it to take
Absolutely.
place. You are invited by God to return back towards Him. A few nights ago we had this saying, I think it's in Dua Arafah, أنت ذاكر قبل الذاكرين. You remember us before we remember you, you
Yeah,
remembered us. People are like, how does that make sense? Well, do you not realize the one who brought you to that prayer mat is the one who wants to speak to you, and the one who gave you
absolutely.
that ihsas in you, that you know what, maybe it's time to do my salat and actually do tawbah. Who gave you that feeling if not the one who wants to see you come back to Him with presence? And I think anyone who's wondering, are my du'as going to be accepted? Is this sin going to be forgiven? That feeling you have that I want it to be forgiven was given to you by someone who wants you to go back towards Him. Assalamu alaikum, by the way, to everyone who's just joined. I saw someone say salam from Iran, so alaikum salam to you and all of the
Wa
listeners,
alaikum
inshallah.
assalam wa rahmatullah.
And I've seen Sheikh Jawad join early, and also Sayyid Jawad Qazwini. So assalamu alaikum to both of you, inshallah. Inshallah you are well, and the others too. There's this story I like about exactly what you just described by Rumi. It's that story of the man who goes and does prayer, istighfar, and he hears no reply, and he keeps praying and hears no reply, and then Iblis comes in and says to him, why are you praying so much? Have you actually heard one answer from this God you're praying to about who you're speaking to? And the man says, well, no, I've not heard any answer. He goes, well, why are you saying istighfar and forgive me if the one you're speaking to doesn't speak back to you? Anyway, the man is thinking, and he realizes, you know what, Iblis is right. There's no point to this prayer, and he stops. The story continues. One day or the next day, Khidr comes towards him, and Khidr says to him, yesterday you were praying, and now you've stopped. Why? And the man says, because I realized, and someone reminded me, I'm saying, Ya Allah, forgive me. Ya Allah, I want to go back to you. And I never heard a reply that it's been accepted. So what was the point of it in the first place? And I think a lot of people actually feel that way sometimes. So in the story, Khidr says, when you were praying, what state were you in when you were on that prayer, man? He says, well, I was crying, I was begging, I was in need. And Khidr goes, do you not realize that state that you were in already, who do you think gave you that feeling except the one you're wanting to speak to? It's not about what you said, it's who made you feel heartbroken for you to want to fix that broken heart with Allah, if not God. And the parable of the story is that, even the feeling before the istighfar is the thing itself. And like you mentioned, that's where niyyah comes in. You have to really intend to use that feeling for something productive. Let me ask you this. Some people have that feeling of spirituality, and in the nights of Qadr, it kind of heats up and you experience it a little bit more. But then it passes very quickly. For some, unfortunately, people don't have these prolonged periods of presence with Allah, and sometimes they want to get it back again. How can we be more consistently present with God where we are feeling that connection for a longer period of time than just glimpses here and there?
Well, I think it's really, it starts with one's mindset as well, because oftentimes, I think we look at Shahr Ramadan or these great nights of spirituality as kind of like anomalies within our life. That, these are nights which are, unique, and they are absolutely unique. There is a reason why God has given fadila towards this month, and he has given fadilas toward the nights of Qadr, because they are unique in that realm. But you find at the same level, it is a continuation of that spiritual process that we go throughout the year as well. And, we have traditions, for example, that emphasize that Shahr Ramadan really is the beginning point of the spiritual season as well. For example, we have a tradition that says that, Shahr Ramadan in many ways is the beginning of the spiritual year. And this is once again an-nakal bil-ma'na, as opposed to, to narrate exactly the word.
It's a podcast. Don't worry, go for it.
It's a podcast, but one has to be scholarly precise as possible, and especially when they're in a state of fasting as well. But
oh yeah, that's true.
On top of that, for example, we have another traditions that says li kulli shay'in rabi wa rabiul Quran shahr Ramadan, that every single thing has a springtime, and then the spring of the Quran is the month of Ramadan. So, what is springtime? Springtime really is when something comes back to life. And over here, the question is that, okay, this says the spring of the Quran is Shahr Ramadan. But, the Quran is alive. The Quran itself has those realities that it is more alive than you and I will ever be. So what really is re-enlivening? What's re-enlivening is that relationship. So I think that if a person keeps a spiritual program going, whether at the simplest level, it's to pray on time, whether it's to wake up for Salatul Layl, whether it's to incorporate du'as and supplications, or, for example, the recitation of the Quran, which, at the very minimum, at least 10 verses a day, according to certain traditions. Other traditions, for example, Imam Ali's advice to Muhammad al-Hanafiya says 50 verses a day. And if these things are continued, I think that, a resemblance of that spirituality one keeps in Shahr Ramadan is something, which a person can keep going even after, because, the goal of this month is fuel. It is not necessarily the end point as well, that it's an important month which serves within the cycle of life, which continues onwards.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I also like that you choose what you want from the month and you go with your niyyah and you try your best to attain it. And it might not be the words. No one's saying read the Quran every day. It could be 10 verses. It could be 50. It might be just one deed you're trying to make part of your habit, and it might be one deed you're trying to stop doing. And linking that to istighfar and tawbah, it could just be one sin you're really trying to get out of your system, and spending 30 days not doing that one thing and hoping that with the help of Allah, a person might not, continue it again. Small goals has always been the way. The people of wisdom say this often. Don't aim for every single thing in the month of Ramadan. Aim for a few things and really intend it. And that keeps coming up in the literature and among the ulama, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we only have so much of a capacity. When you go to a gym, you're not going to start lifting, 300-pound, you're not going to start bench pressing 300 pounds, or at least I can't. But, I don't know about yourself and, the others who are listening.
Depends on the iftar. Depends on the iftar.
I mean, even after whatever food you give me, 300 pounds isn't going to happen. But, to reach, the point is that, to reach that weight and that capacity, it requires a process.
Yeah.
And, most of us don't have the spiritual capability. We don't have the attention span, or we don't have, the means within our lives to recite every single recommended, dua that we can find in Iqbalul A'mal or Mafatihul Janan or, Misbah al-Mutahajjid or whatever work of du'as and supplication that you can go to. We just don't have that capacity. So I think better than that is that a person, tries to internalize what he has the capacity for.
Yeah.
I often see this, for example, those individuals who don't understand Quranic Arabic, their goal really is just to recite the Quran and to finish one recitation, of the Quran from beginning to the end, and Shahr Ramadan, which of course is a very virtuous act. There's no doubt. Many people make the analogies that, what if you're reciting something in German and you don't understand it, what benefit it'll have? No, that analogy falls short. Because, this is the word of God. It will have a benefit, but the question is about maximizing that benefit. So, better than that, really, we have traditions where it's stated that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite 10 verses at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Because in 10 verses, there is a type of reflection and internalization a person can go through. And that's really what the month is about. It's about reflecting, internalizing, there were times in my life as well on these nights of Qadr, for example, that instead of going through all of Joshan al-Kabir, to recite some of those lines and to reflect upon the names of God mentioned within Joshan al-Kabir. So I think this whole approach of quantity really is a problem of the modern world, going back to, the whole postmodernism discussion that you're trying to avoid on us. But, everything really is capitalistic, that how can we maximize Shahr Ramadan and how can we do the most? And, it's really the modern world has neglected the aspect of quality more so than any other time in human history, because everything is a game of quantity and quantification. And we've kind of made our deen and our religion into this game of quantity and quantification. Whereas, the key element is that quality, because, God, for example, we have traditions that say if 2 units of prayer are accepted, all of a person's prayers are accepted. Or, there are certain acts that when they're done properly, they forgive the sins of an individual, or, there are also sins which take away all of the good deeds of an individual. So that really shows the impact on, quality in the life of a person. And I think that's something which is a key concept we can bring in, towards Shahr Ramadan. Even though I think this is a bit, cliche discussion. I think many speakers and scholars over the past, however long have, been discussing this, but I think reminders are always important.
No, definitely. And the way, mashallah. But the way you reminded it is a lot more real than we hear sometimes. Often it's, quantity or quality, focus on these things. But when you link it to Tawbah, you mentioned earlier, going back to Allah then is not some cliche or like words. It's how does it work for you personally? Like, how does going back to Allah work for you? What actually will help you get there? Which du'as, which words, which statements? And I think Shahr Ramadan is a chance for you to know yourself and to know how do you respond to Allah? Like what works for you? Does sitting outside for 10 minutes and contemplating work for you? Does long sujood work for you? And I think people are different. And sometimes we forget that people are different when we enforce these blanket rules of everyone do tawbah, everyone do this. And we use those words way too generically for a crowd of people going through a variety of very difficult issues sometimes. There's a question here which actually, it's comment which reflects that sentiment, which is Assalamu alaikum, alaikum salam. How can we make the most of this month when we feel that so far we haven't done much, and as a result we feel demotivated? This is a beautiful question, and actually I think I hear it a lot that I don't want to listen hard for that question, but you understand the point, right? It's I don't have much anyway. I've come with so little. How can I achieve so much of this month that the Prophet speaks in the month of Sha'ban about? What's a good answer to that question, Sayyidina?
Yeah, so I mean the question he really asked if the question was, I didn't have such a strong spiritual start to the month. How can I make the rest of it better? If I'm paraphrasing it quite, correctly. I really think, when it comes to Shahr Ramadan, there's really, a couple different types of people. One type of person is that individual that the beginning of the month comes and they're energized and they're doing all of these different du'as and supplications and they're engaging in all of these different acts and they have that spiritual state because, they kind of see it as a new beginning. Mm-hmm. But, what's very interesting is that in reality, what is the crux of Shahr Ramadan? What is that, climatic moment, if I were to, use those wordings? That climax is the night of Qadr. And the night of Qadr comes, 19th, 21st, 23rd, according to the majority of traditions, focus on 21st, 23rd, and 23rd. Mm-hmm. But, these nights are coming later in the month. And all of these different actions that a person, has been doing from Rajab to Sha'ban and Shahr Ramadan, ideally it builds an individual for the night of Qadr. So the point that I'm making is that if that strong start hasn't come for you within these first 3-4 days, the goal is to build yourself for those nights. And, that gradual focus day by day is going to get you there. I mean, focus itself is something interesting. When it comes to any act of worship, prayer, dua, supplication, God consciousness, it's really about, the presence of the heart. And the presence of the heart is something which really can be trained in the way that the mind can be trained. And I'll give you an example that, if there's a piece of paper and if on that piece of paper, I draw something or I make a circle and I tell you to stare at it, initially, you might be able to stare at it for 15, 20, 30, 45 seconds, whatever it is. But eventually when you're trained, then that focus is going to increase over time. And the same way is the presence of the heart. The more a person is able to have that, the more it increases. But, the crux of all of that, really surrounds around the understanding of God and the love for God. Because a person, who's really intoxicated in love will always want to speak about their beloved. And, when that happens, your heart always turns towards your beloved in that sense.
Yeah, the smallest things will remind you of, people won't see what you see. People won't understand what you're looking at, Yeah, there are so many. I'm thinking of Layl Majnoon and all these poems now, which
all the stuff which is used in all of the Irfani texts and whatnot, all those parables.
Yeah, but yeah, it also calls for why we should have private worship, because not everyone will understand that divine conversation you're having with Allah, and you don't need to explain yourself to everyone for the progress you are making or the difficulties you're going through. This is a very personal journey. So in answer to that question as well, like, you are on your own journey, and allow yourself to go through those stages of pausing so that you can go through those stages of movement. There's hadith of Imam Rida alayhi salam where I think he says that, sometimes your heart is gonna feel tired and sometimes your heart will feel active. And Imam Baqir has another narration very similar where your heart goes through different stages, and sometimes it turns towards you, sometimes it turns away. When it turns towards you, you do good deeds. When it turns away, you rest it, you give it a break. And I think we should all allow ourselves in Shahr Ramadan to allow our heart to just feel what it's feeling. Even like you mentioned, it's a divine conversation. When you speak to someone that you love, and I'm doing it right now, you don't just speak. Sometimes you stop and you listen and you remain silent and you let them speak. And if they remain silent, you sit in the silence with them because it's them that you love. It's not necessarily the words that they're giving. And it's the same with Allah Azza wa Jal. It's not the case that my love to him is conditional, that he must give me this at this time for this relationship to keep going.
No.
He could give me nothing for the day or for the next few days, and it's him who's not giving, and that's enough for me. That's more beautiful to us.
So I mean, an element that I'll add to the discussion is, I know we had a brief mention of the personalization, that the journey to God is very personal, but I think personally that a more comprehensive approach is to recognize that there are elements of that spiritual journey which are universal. That's why we have laws which are universal. That's why salat, for example, is wajib and mandatory upon everyone else. Yeah. But then at the same time, there are certain traditions that, although, we'll have traditions which mention the value and the reward of an act universally, but there are also certain traditions which mention value as relative based upon the natural spiritual temperament of a person, or based upon that personal journey that person is on. So, for example, one hadith, it says, أَفْضَلُ الْأَعْمَالِ أَحْمَزُهَا, that the best of action is the most difficult action. Now, what necessarily is the most difficult for you may not be the most difficult for me, but that has been considered the best of action in that moment, or the most tiring, or the most, hard of actions. So, both of those different elements are there. And in terms of, now that we covered the element of the universality of the journey and those acts which are universal, but at the same time, I think you alluded to quite beautifully that everyone has what we call in traditional text a mizaj, or a spiritual temperament. And a person's mizaj is composed of the level of jalal and jamal, the level of grandeur, the level of, let's say, kindness doesn't really construe the word, beauty doesn't really construe the word in this idea. But, we'll say, whatever the opposite of grandeur is, since we're doing this on the fly, I didn't really think of the, proper word to construe it in the sentence. But point is that everyone has a natural temperament. Yeah. And based upon that natural spiritual temperament, there's going to be things that one person inclines to that you may not incline to. And that's really where the personalization of the journey comes.
What you've done is basically answered the question we set ourselves what feels like hours ago, which was, how do we learn to forgive each other? Well, this is the answer. People have different temperaments. It is not the case that we have different intentions towards one another. We just have different mizaj among ourselves. And that makes it easier to have empathy with someone, that, I have this temperament, you have that temperament. I do not want there to be bad blood between us, or, anger between us. Rather, there's just a difference, and we learn to love each other despite it.
And naturally based on temperament, my apologies, this thought would be lost, but naturally based on temperament, there's going to be certain people that it's harder for you to click with that person. Yeah. Because y'all's temperaments are so different. And then there are certain people that as soon as you meet them, it's as if you've known them for years. But, that's a quick throw in. You can, continue. My apologies.
Right. So sometimes it's easy to forgive someone if you have the latter you're describing, where, it's easy to forgive them because maybe you see your similarity in them. But when it's not easy to forgive them, that's more of a reason to go through the effort of doing it. And you mentioned it earlier. There are so many spiritual advices for us that when things are difficult, you should do those things. Just because it not only controls your nafs, but sometimes that which is easier is not always that which is the right thing. I mean, it could be easy to let a grudge remain, but it's harder to oppose your nafs and forgive someone when they've done wrong to you, when it's the right thing to do. But something is getting in the way, some love for... Now that I try and describe it, I can't think of a good reason why we should allow a grudge to last between brothers. We have walaya, we have love for Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salam, we have so much in common. What is the function of things which divide us in between brothers and between sisters? I see no value to those things, really. And I'm trying to give that point of view. And I can't.
No, I think you construed it quite well.
Inshallah. If there's anyone who would like to add because you're coming to the end, add a question or a comment, now's a great time if you'd like to share your own experience about seeking forgiveness or forgiving somebody when it might not have been easy. This is a safe space for you to share your story, inshallah. Similarly, if you have a question for Sayyidina, then please, do write it. We've covered a range of topics, but if it is linked to anything we've said, we are at your service. Here's another question I'm seeing right here, and one on the private. I'll read it out for you so you can, relax
Oh,
it. Don't
please,
worry.
please.
I got
My
this, bro.
my my phone stand is a bit makeshift right now. I have a bottle of water that I can't drink as my phone stand.
Oh, well, mine's not as tragic as yours. Mine is a vase balancing on, that verse, that hadith, like this earth is like, what is it? A dunya on resting on a fish or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but it's a vase resting on a table, missing a leg. On it is a small stand. Anyway, through different means we're here. How do you give yourself hope that after sinning many times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us? Though we know He is the most merciful, but it can sometimes be hard to convince ourselves. Any tips? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's many different angles one can take towards that. I think one angle that oftentimes people they understand abstract concepts such as forgiveness and mercy through concrete examples in their life. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what generally human beings do. They move from the concrete to the abstract. That's why when you teach a child math, you'll have a picture of one apple next to another apple, and that equals two apples. And through those concrete visuals, you're able to understand that abstract, concept. So when it
Yeah.
comes to the mercy of Allah, I mean, depending on what situation you're in life, for example, if, somebody is a mother, then, she really knows that no matter how many times her child messes up, at the end of the day, she'll forgive that child. And based upon that relationship, it's a reflection of the mercy of God in many ways, as the tradition says that Allah is more merciful than 70 of your mothers. And of course, 70 is an expression of mubalagha and an expression of exaggeration in the Arabic language, because, God's mercy really is infinite. But if you really look at, so that's one angle of it, based on your personal relationships and your personal reflections. The second angle to really convince yourself is to look at the different texts found within the hadith, found within the Quran. For example, Imam Sadiq, for example, saying that if a person sins and, a person comes to Imam Sadiq and he says that I sin and then I ask for forgiveness and I sin again and I ask for forgiveness and I sin again and I ask for forgiveness, is there still forgiveness for me even though I'm messing up? The Imam says to him that, have you not read the verse of the Quran, كَتَبَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ, that God has made mercy something which is incumbent upon himself.
Wow.
So, traditions such as this, or, verses of the Quran that say, for example, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ جَمِيعًا. For example, look at the wordings of God, and he says that when my servant, even after you've sinned, my servant, when you were extravagant of yourselves, do not lose hope of the mercy of God. Allah forgives all of those sins. So, I think that's another angle two right there. Number one, the personal. Number two, examining the text of the Quran and the Hadith. But I think the third level to really convince oneself of, the mercy of God is to recognize that recognition of Allah would not happen without tawfiq and that divine grace from Allah. And the fact that you at this moment
You
are
realize.
reflecting about the mercy of God and reflecting about your relationship with God, this itself shows that, God has a type of, facilitation that's occurring for you in your relationship with God. And all of these different realizations, I think, is it's kind of the tip of the iceberg because time is against us. But, I hope the answer, helps at some level.
The mercy of God is such an ocean that people kind of take different things from it depending on, I guess, the size of the cup they bring. So for some people, those arguments work well. For others, other things work. Inshallah, this one works for you. It's the dear brother or sister I can't see. We hope it's beneficial for you.
And I will say that, when it comes to really, because the person who asked the question, it was really about, how do I internalize it and how do I feel it? A lot of times it is that spiritual experience that a person feels, that, spiritual elevation or that enjoyment in the dhikr of God, because, to give oftentimes rational arguments or to give burhan and demonstrative proof it really
Yeah.
remains in the mind. It doesn't, always settle in the heart. And our goal is really for, things not to be istilahat or to different terminology. And, the goal is really for us things to settle. And, I think as we come to the end of the discussion, there's a beautiful anecdote that I heard from one of the students of Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amuli when I was recently in home. And he was mentioning that, Ayatollah Hassan Zada Amuli would say this one thing. Ayatollah Hassan Zada would say that truth itself is a light. Truth itself is nur. When you take that step towards truth with a sincere intention, yes, it's going to be difficult. It won't be easy. But the moment you make that step towards truth, truth itself is a light, and it'll illuminate your next step as well. Wow. And in that way, footstep after footstep, it may get harder and harder. But every footstep you put on the ground, the more that light and that pathway, it becomes clear. And that's really what it is. It starts with that intention. And each footstep we place towards understanding God, the more light that comes into our heart, the more that understanding will penetrate deeper.
Wow, mashallah. With that, I would like to thank you, Sayed Bilal, for adding so much light to this discussion through the steps you've taken us towards the truth. Thank you. Thank you for your
It was my
thoughts.
pleasure. It's always a pleasure to join you and to benefit from your discussions as well.
No, of course. We are at your service, and all of the listeners. In fact, all of you have added nur to this discussion through your attendance and through your points and discussion. So may Allah bless all of you, inshallah. And thank you so much for listening. Okay, this part is the funnest part. Say, Bilal, stay with me on this. I'm going to put you on the spot. So tomorrow we have a different speaker. Unfortunately, you are busy solving the issues of the world and in Houston and in Dallas and on the road.
I just try to, if I'm able to solve the problems of myself, then, that would be a big accomplishment.
Inshallah, inshallah, we are with you, and hopefully you're with us. You're with me as well. Pray for me. So tomorrow we have a different speaker discussing this verse. Rahim. Now, all I wanted to ask you is, why should all of the listeners tune in tomorrow for this verse? What is your quick promo that we should all tune in and follow the channel?
This verse itself is speaking about our purpose of creation, and there really is no more fundamental question that mankind is asked from the beginning of time until now than why are we here? What are we really doing here? And there's many things I can say about this verse. For example, the hadith of Imam Sadiq saying "Le ya'budun" means "Le ya'rafun," to recognize Allah. But I'll leave it at that. That goal of creation is something which we really always need to ask ourselves: why are we doing what we're doing?
And that will continue tomorrow. Thanks for the promo, Sayyidina. I'll announce the speaker at time for Fajr for who's coming on tomorrow, and we'll continue exactly where Sayyid left off with a different speaker, inshallah, on that verse of what does Ya'budu mean? What's my purpose in finding worship to Allah? And that's it. Thank you, Sayyid. Take care.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Community. Take care. And goodbye, everyone. Pray for us, inshallah. Ma'as salam.
Ma'as salam. Fi aman Allah.
Habibi.